is Satyan Bharti and welcome to another episode of TFR Insights by RackN. And today we have with us once again our friend Rob Hirschfeld from RackN. And this is, if I'm not wrong, last episode of our three-part series of Amazon AWS Outpost. And today we are going to talk about the impact on the industry. As you mentioned last time, that it's a big sea change in Amazon's approach towards cloud. It's no longer just my cloud, public cloud. It's also about moving into your prem, but it also poses a lot of challenges and also a lot of threats. When AWS is involved.
Yeah.
So I want to understand from your perspective. Let's just start with that. First of all, what does it mean for cloud in general?
So for AWS, this is really a big change in their thinking from everything is running in our cloud to, you're going to own and manage the infrastructure. It really is a redefinition of how they've traditionally positioned what cloud is into something that's much more hybrid. And recognizing that people are going to run infrastructure on their own premises or in their own colo, and that they want control of that infrastructure. So this is, while Amazon is, and we talked about this in the last session, Amazon is really maintaining very tight control on that infrastructure. It really is a retreat for Amazon in what they think of infrastructure actually is, how it's managed and deployed. It's a major change from that. And I don't think we should underestimate just how much of an acknowledgement that is, and that people do want to hug their servers.
It's kind of changing the whole chemistry of cloud, if I'm not wrong. It's no more public cloud, which is AWS, GCP, and Azure versus private cloud with OpenStack or whatever you're doing. Amazon is everywhere now. Of course, that creates a lot of opportunity for AWS. What does it mean for competitors? And how are they reacting? And I'm not just talking about Google or Microsoft, but also companies like VMware or even IBM and Red Hat or Oracle or Cisco.
So we're really seeing just how dominant a player Amazon has become, right? 5 years ago, nobody would have expected them to literally walk into people's data centers with infrastructure, servers, and services to sell. And the fact that they're really doing this mostly themselves. I know there are things coming where VMware and some of the hardware vendors are more involved with their own infrastructure. I'm interested in seeing that as it comes out. But this is really shaking up everybody in the industry, right? What I see is everybody responding to this announcement in very serious ways, right? The VMwares of the world have to take this seriously because it's really bringing Amazon infrastructure into what has traditionally been their last mile. And I know that they have a play in here, but it's not the same as when people really ran their own infrastructure and VMware was a software play. This is a very different services angle. And so they've got to think about it. Google with Anthos trying to come on premises is a very different offering. And I suspect they need to think very carefully how fast they can make that proceed and what the challenges are. Microsoft has Azure Edge and a whole bunch of Azure pieces, and they're trying to bring it on premises. And so far that hasn't been greeted with laurel wreaths and a lot of balloons and parties. So it's unclear, if Amazon's going to suddenly burst into the scene and make waves, but this is clearly a place where other people thought they had leadership, Google and Amazon specifically, and then suddenly found that they didn't, because Amazon's very much leapfrogged them from a offerings perspective. And then I think traditional software vendors have even a bigger hill to climb. And this is we've been watching the SaaSification of the industry, where everything runs as a service in a cloud vendor or multiple cloud vendors. For us, we see people in industry getting a little wary of giving up that much control. And we're starting to see people say, I actually do want to be able to run software and manage my infrastructure. But in this case, we're really saying, hey, if you want to be a SaaS can now come on premises through Amazon, which further sort of segments SaaS as this limited thing. And then everything else is Amazon.
How has the whole ecosystem, I'm not just talking about vendors, but also users reacted to Outpost?
I haven't seen as much reaction in industry. I think either the people who are early adopters are being very tight-lipped because they have to be, or they're still evaluating. I definitely see a lot of people interested in what they're doing. The same thing is true with Athos. I know that there's a number of people doing Athos trials, and that stuff hasn't surfaced as much as a general commentary in industry either. And it could be that it's just a much bigger footprint for people to consume. None of these solutions that are cloud coming on premises are casual solutions. They're not something, they require big contracts, big lifts, in some cases, heavy consulting footprint. In the case of Athos, which is sold a lot through consulting partners. So these aren't, traditional cloud drop in, buy a server with your credit card or VM with your credit card. They're much more in-depth things. In some cases, they're much more in-depth than just buying a server, installing it, and racking it yourself. You're really committing to the cloud process, the cloud way, the cloud services that are available. The days of do-it-yourself this is a very different story. And I personally think that, do-it-yourself is part of the innovation that's led to IT working, where people try a lot of different things. This is not showing us with the same innovation up and down the stack. It's the innovations at the top.
Amazon kind of breaking away from their, kind of stand on, everything has to go in the public cloud to work. Does it also pose a kind of risk for Amazon because it shows some cracks there?
It does very much. I think that, it is an acknowledgement that people have a reason to run infrastructure on premises. They were sort of doing that with Greengrass, right? Where it was like, hey, here's factory data or, an IoT gateway device. In this case, it's really acknowledging that people have a reason to have their own data centers, and they're trying to thread the needle on that message. The reality is, and the data has been very consistent, right? Only 20% of workloads are moving to the public cloud. There's plenty of examples of companies that are all in or cloud first. Word on the street that I'm hearing is that's not always working out for companies the way they expected. Either it's harder to drag all their legacy pieces over, they're finding when they get there that it's very expensive. Sometimes they're finding that the service reliability of cloud is not everything that it's cracked up to be, and that there's issues and problems, security issues that, it's might be better than you had done your past in your legacy environment, but it's still there. It's still operational concerns, and just, trying to make it all swept under the rug is not making the problems go away. You're just ignoring them, frankly.
How does it change not only cloud computing, but also computing in general when AWS is moving into your data center?
It's one of the things that I think a lot about, and I actually have concerns about, is that with Amazon, while it has a lot of services and capabilities, it's still a very monolithic architecture, and that's, you're highly incented to run things Amazon's way. That's what cloud native is about. It's about adopting your processes to the benefit of the cloud vendors. And they are vendors. And so they have reasons for what they want to optimize and how they want you to use their services. And so the more we buy into these and the more people adapt into those infrastructures, the more they're captive into what those processes are. And lock-in is a real thing. And it's not lock-in that you're locked into a vendor. You're actually much more locked into the processes and tools and capabilities and APIs that vendor has offered you. And it can be very, very hard to move away from those pieces. And our industry as a whole has, by embracing that so fully, have really moved away from saying, oh, I have a standard open API, or I have a way that this is going to work in a cross-vendor or a portable way. And that's that we've really slowed down and stopped focusing on that to the same extent. I think that's a challenge.
Another big problem is that for a long time it was considered that data center or do it yourself was kind of escaping AWS's gravity, but now it's kind of nothing. It's just like a big giant black hole ganchua that was in the Interstellar, that nothing would escape its gravity.
That's sort of the industry challenge here, is that if you look 10 years out, if Amazon is successful in this march, then every computer cycle, every operation would ultimately run on Amazon infrastructure managed by Amazon. I mean, that's Outpost is really a statement that, sort of we're coming into your data center type of thing, which is amazing if you're all in on Amazon and you're taking advantage of everything up and down the stack. And things like that tend to be amazing until they're not, which is sort of, you realize that you've really depended on a vendor for this type of work. We saw the same thing in manufacturing with supply chains. And this is really, to me, I have an industrial engineering background, but it's a supply chain question. You can do everything yourself in-house and literally build a completely vertically integrated product. And that has challenges too. Or you can go into a much more distributed supply chain. If it's too distributed, that has problems. But if you depend on just one vendor in your supply chain, those become really serious challenges. And those vendors have a tendency to walk up and down the supply chain and continue to take over industries that are related to them when they get in the middle of things. Railroads, oil, telephone. We've seen the story before. And this really, Amazon is breaking out of the data center shell that they've been in, and not that they've been constrained very much, but they're breaking out of that. And for everybody in the industry, we need to be asking, how do we want to respond?
And now I'll go back to the point that you mentioned earlier was innovation. A lot of innovation was happening because of do-it-yourself. People were scratching their own niches and solving it. Right. What does it really mean for the startups, for players who are coming up with solving problems? Because everything will be logged into AWS ecosystem no matter what you do.
In the 90s, Windows and the Windows monopoly was actually very effective for helping a lot of companies have a place, sort of a common place to do work. But it had negative implications also in, blocking out competitors, and there's a fine line to work with this. In some ways, I think that Amazon as a standard platform has been very helpful for people to figure out how to do real automation and really build IT infrastructures that were robust and scalable. And that's great. The challenge becomes if everything we do is against that Amazon API, and they start being able to control, tune, or limit what people are able to do in that, then that ends up hurting innovation on the other side because it becomes impossible to come up with new things. Redmonk did a really interesting, James O'Grady, about competing with Amazon. And at this point, your competition with Amazon is either build it bigger and bigger and bigger clouds and try and compete on sheer footprint, or to find ways that allow people to do what Amazon does by themselves. And there will be competition. Edge computing is specifically along those lines. We're moving into small footprint infrastructure where things are redefined and the standard architectures don't apply anymore, right? ARM is much more interesting, and non-traditional vendors have an opportunity to come in and sell infrastructure into those markets. And so there are places. This is why the Outposts is potentially so interesting and threatening. Is it could be Amazon coming into the edge. It's not quite how they're marketing it. In a place where we're about to see this burst of new hardware, new software platforms, new use cases for the industry. And we really want those things to go through very fast, tight, iterative cycles where new vendors have a lot of incentive to come out. If I was going to build a new cloud infrastructure, that would be a really hard challenge. You'd have to literally have a global footprint overnight. It becomes very hard to do. It's like trying to build a new car company. And that, Tesla, to Tesla's credit, they walked into a place where the incumbents were very dominant, but he's used billions of dollars to try and do that. So we've reached a point where cloud infrastructure is $1 billion, multi-billion-dollar entry game. And the innovation that's going to come is either going to come by going on top of that, which entrenches Amazon's interests, or is disruptive to Amazon's existence. And that's really where the industry's ended up.
But as the domination of AWS increases, how would Europe react to that? Because they are very, very particular about how
yeah, there's regulatory environment.
how would China react to that? How would India react to that?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. A lot of times I think the world is chasing what Amazon has created. China, is building huge, big clouds. They have the resources and the sort of the mindset of, government, establishing big footprint domination. And they're certainly not in favor of a whole bunch of small individuals and small companies doing that work. This to me is actually the interesting challenge, right? Europe tends to be more regulatory and want to have smaller regions, but not necessarily encourage all of the innovation and small companies popping up that would be less controlled. And so we sort of have this challenge. The regulatory environment in the United States encourages a lot of growth and innovation and companies where they're changing the rules, if you will. And then the VC community has been blowing those up into unicorns that continue to challenge the rules even when they've become major players, which is sort of what we see happening in the cloud and social media space, is that there's continuing this Wild West mentality for things that start affecting hundreds of millions of people. And we need to find the right balance. The challenge with innovating around Amazon is if you're chasing Amazon, you're following their pattern and their lead. And that's not a bad thing, but what you need to do is do things the way Amazon does them better and more efficiently. It's going to take a smaller, somebody saying, you know what, I don't want to have to buy, hundreds of millions of servers in, hundreds of locations in order to compete with Amazon. I want to do it in a way that allows the people in those sites to have control and buy their own infrastructure and use their own assets. And that's actually, from RackN's perspective, the way that the industry is going to change is to go forward into an innovation model that we used to see, which was where individuals could buy, integrate, do their own work, right? More back to traditional software, and making that possible for people to lift up their own infrastructure. And that's what Amazon's really working against right now. Is they've changed the baseline to say that our infrastructure, you use our infrastructure, we take care of all that stuff, you build on top of it. In my mind, we have to solve the problem that says infrastructure's been too hard to use, too hard to buy, too hard to innovate on top of in the small scale. And once we solve that problem, then things should move back to individual operational control. And that actually has a lot of benefits, especially for the people with their own, try to innovate and manage their own destiny.
What would be the impact of this move on open source world?
So right now, open source has been moving up in the stack until just software that you run on top of AWS. And when you look at what the cloud has been creating from an open source perspective, open infrastructure code, like I used to be involved in OpenStack and even Kubernetes to an extent, has not emerged as a disruptor for Amazon's infrastructure as a service business. And so I think that we're actually in a place where open source code is really, people are reevaluating how it works and what it can do and what the sustaining model is behind any of these open source projects. And this is one of the things that Amazon has really shown us, is that operational control, operational value, and sustaining are core values in IT. And if people think that you're going to get that from an open source project without paying for it, they need to reevaluate the whole market. And that's what I've seen going on, is that we've been downloading free stuff and then watching Amazon walk all over people as they realize it's hard to sustain their data center infrastructure for free. And that a vendor, Amazon, can come in and provide a service where you don't see any of that, how that works behind the scenes, and just crush the market. And they're, Amazon or Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, Oracle doing the same thing. That's not open source cloud infrastructure. And to me, we really need to think about what open source is an innovation model where people can collaborate. Collaboration is the key thing to me. But the collaboration has to be around a sustained kernel where people can count on the APIs, count on the quality, count on the support that they need to make the place where they're innovating around work. And open source hasn't addressed that question in my mind. Dropping code out there and hoping people can use it does not create that core of sustainable innovation that you innovate around. Amazon has shown us. They provided the core, people innovated around us. Outposts potentially is coming onto your premises to continue delivering that value. And we're going to keep innovating around those APIs. Open source needs to ask themselves, the open source communities need to ask themselves, is it more important to be free or more important to have these open ecosystems where people can collaborate? And then start paying for it, because you're paying for Amazon, right? There's no free Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob, once again for taking your time out and discussing AWS Outpost. And as I said, I look forward to talking to you again about the bigger, picture of open source, where it's heading or where it should head. Once again, thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.